Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Seasoned Enablement Leader, sales trainer, and dog rescue hero, Ian Spandow. He has extensive global and intercultural expertise and over 35 years of experience. In addition, he has a proven track record of upskilling sales teams to high performance through his unique and somewhat radical sales training. He has held several leadership roles in the technology industry, including Director of Sales Training and Enablement at Riverbed, Senior Director of Sales Training and Enablement at Marin Software, and Director of Training and Development at MongoDB, and Global Field Readiness Leader at WalkMe. As an immigrant worker living in the U.S., he worked for some time at top Silicon Valley startups after finding and losing a fortune in 1990s Ireland. Now the head of a nonprofit dog rescue and sanctuary, he has dedicated himself to helping animals and the occasional salesperson who in return help him stay connected to what matters most. From his base in Grass Valley, California, we get into an incredible story. Well, it's wonderful to meet you. Let's get into it. Thank you again for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Good to see you, Joe.
Good to see you. Let's begin our journey with this. 5 years ago, this pandemic turned everything upside down, changed our lives. How did you get through that era, and how did it affect the way that you live and do business in 2025?
Yeah, pretty radically. I was working out of the city, San Francisco. My wife and I both lived there, and I, was afforded the ability to work remotely, like most people. And my wife and I had been in dog rescue for quite a long time and fostering, and we'd always had a goal to start our own dog rescue. So we got out of the city and we moved up here to the boonies, to the middle of nowhere, Grass Valley, California. Got ourselves a nice little 10-acre plot, built out a lot of enclosures and kennels and the types of things that you would need to run a rescue. And we both work full-time, of course, as well, but, our passion is dogs. We don't have children. So we moved up here to the countryside and I never looked back, really. Now, my poor wife still has to commute down to San Francisco Bay, which is 2 hours away from here, because she works as a nurse in a hospital. But I've been afforded, the luxury of working here in my home office and being surrounded by dogs all day long.
Right on. Well, let me ask you this, and you would probably be a fan favorite at a career day at an elementary school, but let me put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds, and one of the kids in the room wants to know what you do for a living, and they're like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
I train salespeople in the technology industry. I've been in the IT industry since the late 80s, and I worked for some of the bigger corporations, Oracle and companies like that. And that's what actually brought me here to America. I was transferred by Oracle. I worked for Europe, Middle East, Africa team for 6 years and then moved over to California to Redwood Shores. So I teach young and experienced executives negotiation skills and relationship management skills and really the human behavior type stuff that, people need in business.
And then talk about the component of the dogs and what you're doing on that end of things.
Yeah, well, I'll take a moment to shamelessly plug my book, Rescuing Dogs and Salespeople, because that's the way I feel about both of them. They both need rescuing. Yeah. Dogs in particular, we know a lot about that, right? There's 300,000 to 400,000 dogs, sadly, are euthanized every year in America. So we pull dogs from high kill shelters or, abusive situations or hoarding situations, and we rehabilitate them here until we can find a good home for them. And salespeople have some things in common with dogs. They're very treat rewarded. If you're training them, they need to be motivated highly. But the environment as well, the pack environment is very important. Having a strong alpha leader, things like that are very similar in technology sales teams and in dog packs. Our alpha here, for instance, is a 40-pound little scraggly dog that bosses around 85-pound German Shepherds all day and 100-pound, Mastiffs. It doesn't take to be the biggest, most burly dog to be the alpha. It's all about their personality and their behaviors. And I've seen that the same in I work for Larry Ellison and people like that before, right? Some of them are not the most imposing leaders, not the people you would immediately think, oh, there's a top business executive. A lot of them are actually very quiet and subdued and thoughtful and careful, and that's something we see with dogs as well. Some of the most aggressive looking breeds like pit bull terriers or something like that are very often the most cuddly and most friendly and most loving dogs that you could ever see, So
Yeah.
I also feel that salespeople, are treated pretty badly in a lot of positions. If you think about, and I know you were a DJ, I'm also a jazz enthusiast myself. If you think about things like that, the longer you do it, the better you get at it, the more
Yeah.
stable typically that role becomes, right?
Yeah.
Same would be true in most professions, but or trades. But in sales, the longer you do it, the harder it gets because nobody's quotas goes down.
Yeah.
If you got 200,000 this year, you're probably going to get 250 or 300,000 next year as a goal.
Yeah.
So the longer you do a sales job, oftentimes the harder it is to keep it. And so that's why we see salespeople moving from one company to another, often in just 2 or 3 years. The original idea was, my parents thought you got a job and you stayed in that job for your whole career if you could, right? But that's not the case with sales, or very seldom the case with sales, shall we say.
So take me back to when you were 12 years old. What did you want to do when you grew up? What was your dream job?
I wanted to be a rock star, of
Okay.
course, like
Yeah.
everybody, I played in bands from when I was, about that age. Actually, 11 years old was my first band.
Yeah.
And I was a jazz trained drummer initially, and then, of course, got into pop and rock and everything else. And still playing bands today, by the way, 45 years later, but, never got famous and definitely never made any money doing it, just for the love of it, really. But no, I was also really interested in computers. I was lucky, born at the right time that home computers came out when I was about 10 or 11 years old. They were more for playing games and things like that than, we didn't see any applications for them as being a career.
Yeah.
So it was really more dumb luck than anything else that by the time I graduated high school, I knew how to code and I understood quite a bit about, software and things like that. And I defaulted into that life.
So let me ask you this. What was one of the first early jazz shows you saw live that blew you away?
Well, you may never have heard of him, but there's a guy called Louis Stewart and the Louis Stewart Trio. My instructor was his drummer, a guy called Johnny Wadham. He's sadly no longer with us. And that was in Dublin in the National Concert Hall, which is a small enough venue. And I knew from that moment on I wanted to be a drummer. The first time I saw Johnny Wadham do a solo, I wanted to be a drummer.
Yeah. So take me back to your childhood. What were the foundational elements of music, technology, being highly driven, training others, animals? What were all these seeds that were planted that have become you in your life today?
Yeah, well, the answer to that is in the subtitle, which is Memoir of a Mutt. Because I am a mutt.
Yeah.
As you probably gathered, I grew up in Ireland, but with a name like Spandow. Ich habe eine oder zwei Wörter auf Deutsch natürlich. And my mother was actually French, alors on parlait français aussi. So I grew up in a family with 4 different accents. My sister had a different accent to me because she was born in Kenya. My father was Zimbabwean and my mother was French. And then we were in Ireland because simply Aer Lingus needed pilots at the time, and my father was an ex-RAF fighter pilot and just landed in Dublin, Ireland. There are none of us in Ireland anymore. My sister and her family live in France. I moved to America in 2010. And my parents are both passed now. So, not really fitting in was an early part of it, not sounding like anybody else. We didn't go to mass. Everyone on our road was a Catholic, of course, and we weren't. So definitely it was just being different. Jazz was not a huge thing in Ireland either, it wasn't the music my friends were listening to, put it that way.
Yeah.
It was more punk rock at the time, I think, was big.
Yeah.
And then, just having a sort of more international view of things, Fortunate thing about being the son of an airline pilot is until I was 25 years old, I got 10% airfares.
Yeah.
And what they called, in those days, they used to call a national flag carrier meant that you could go on British Airways or, basically any national flag carrier for 10%. And that was, Lufthansa and all of the different, we could go anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Very inexpensively. So, I definitely exploited that, that discount and got around a little bit.
So
who's been a hero? Who's been an inspirational force that's allowed you to evolve into who you are today?
Well, funnily enough, it's going to be a kind of corny choice, but Bono or Paul Hewson, as we knew him, the U2 parents were friends of my parents as we grew up. Everybody in Ireland knows everybody, you know.
Yeah.
But in particular, one of the U2 parents was an Aer Lingus captain as well. So, you know, my father being an Aer Lingus captain, we became fast friends with them, and they were also expatriates who had moved from Africa. So I watched U2 from being a really terrible garage band, not being very good, you know, become this global phenomena. Bono was always a very gentle, kind person to us, you know, even as he was becoming more and more famous and what have you. When we would go to concerts or something like that, they'd always make sure that there was tickets and that you were looked after, and you know, just never really never became that pop star that you thought, you know, would be too good for everybody and all that kind of stuff. I recall one time, I did have a brother, Joe, who passed when he was 20 years old. But before he passed, at a Christmas party, with lots of, you know, interesting and semi-famous people at it, Bono sat down and played chess with my brother. He was disabled.
Wow.
So he immediately took one look in the corner, saw this disabled kid, and asked him what he liked. And my brother loved playing chess. And the next thing, he came out with a chessboard, and he sat down for an hour and played chess on Christmas Day with my disabled brother. And that stuck with me for a long time. I'll never have a bad word said about him because of that.
Wow. Have you seen the movie on Apple Plus about him?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Like what happened growing up was unreal. Like I
yeah,
had no idea that was kind of the tapestry of his life and how he
yeah.
got to where he's at. I've always loved the music and loved what they've done, but it just
Mm.
absolutely ratcheted up my respect for him as a human.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
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 He's just a couple of years older than me, you know. My sister actually used to date Adam, the bass player in U2. So
Okay.
I tease her a lot that, you know, God damn it, you could have married into a millionaire.
I love it. So let me ask you this. What has been the motivator for you to do all of this work at a high level every day? To get up, to do it, to take care of your own soul? What is that energy for you every day?
Pretty simple, really, you know. And again, kind of corny, but you know, leave the world in a better place than you joined it. Like I mentioned, I don't have children. My wife and I chose not to. So the dogs are our children, you know. And my overwhelming philosophy, whether it be in business or with dogs, is if you can improve just even one person's life, and it doesn't have to be one, but then you know, that's a purpose for living. I think all human beings' purpose for living should be to try and improve another human being's life.
Yeah.
And you know, we placed 260 odd dogs into homes now, and we get a lot of Christmas cards. You know, we get a lot of annual sort of gotcha day reminders or things like that, or people will send us things or gifts, even, you know, sometimes, and how much their life has been changed by this particular dog. And then professionally, I get that quite a lot as well. You know, I've trained a little over 9,000 salespeople in my career across 32 different countries. So I have this wonderful network for a start of, you know, everywhere from, you know, the Middle East to Australia to, you know, really around the world. There's probably nowhere where if I went visit, I couldn't go out for a beer with somebody, you know. And like I say, you get a lot of these, you know, sort of anniversary type things. Some people send me pictures of things that they purchased. And they say, hey, you know, I finally got that cabin by the lake. And, you know, we talked about it 15 years ago when you were training me. And I told you this is what I wanted to do. And I personally have managed, you know, I had 40 people reporting to me at Oracle. I've had a little over 50 people reporting to me in my own company. So I've been an employer or a manager, you know, for 35 odd years. And again, you hope that you know, affect that person's career in a positive way, that you know, have an input that benefits them in some way. And yeah, I mean, I'm a godfather 4 times over at this point because, you know, certain people have certainly been able to help reach their professional goals, you know.
So as a writer, what was the book? Who was the author that inspired you early on?
Actually, it wasn't an author. It was over the years, you know, because Irish people, as you know, like storytelling, and being a mutt like I am, I've got a lot of stories. And I would teach classes, you know, I taught a little over 5,000 people at Oracle. And a lot of times at the end of the class, people would come up to me and say, Ian, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book, you know? And then what happened was a year ago, one of the downside of rescue is a giant mastiff. Not all dogs want to be rescued. And a giant mastiff got a hold of my arm and put me in the hospital for 10 days.
Wow.
I had 7 hours of surgery on my left arm, which still works fine, but I don't have very much sensation in it. All the nerves and everything were severed. So I was out of work. I was in a sling for 3 to 6 months really before I could do anything useful with my left arm. And that was the time I thought, okay, you know, I've been thinking about writing this book forever, and I'm going to start getting it down, you know, and it's kind of slow because I had one hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me, but it took probably the guts of a year, you know, to get to a good draft. And finally, then I hired an editor to, you know, make it pretty, take out the boring bits, and he did, and he was great. And it ended up about a third skinnier than I had originally written, and I think that's the error of first-time authors, right? They just write everything down. And fortunately, I got found a good editor, and he said, you know, great story for you and your family. Nobody else is going to care about most of that stuff. So so just take out all that stuff out and keep the lessons in, and keep the, you know, the sort of the stuff that makes the story move.
So if you were to have a dream tonight and run into that younger 12-year-old version of you, and you had a coffee table book of your life, and you could go through it and show them what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you've become, would that version of you believe that that was your life?
Probably not where I am right now. Most of it, I hope, yes. But like I say, I live in rural California now, at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, in one of the most beautiful places you've ever seen in your life. Lake Tahoe is about a little over an hour's drive from here, you know, and I'm sure you've seen Tahoe or maybe even been there. But, you know, Yosemite's a couple of hours away. You know, this particular area of California, I think, is just fantastic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I grew up in the city. I grew up in Dublin. And then I lived in New York City for 6 years and San Francisco for 10 years, you know, so I've been a city guy most of my life. So I probably wouldn't have guessed that I'd be out in the middle of the countryside, you know, surrounded by trees and rocks, basically. So that I wouldn't have seen coming.
So let me ask you this. If you were to walk into a room of everybody that's known you in a business sense throughout your career, and you could go to that podium and tell them one fun story about you, an experience that you went through, a place you went to, an adventure you went on, jumping out of an airplane, what fun story would you tell that room?
There's a few. A few. I remember one night being at a U2 show in the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, and we were always lucky enough to get tickets. You know, good tickets, like, you know, and I had some friends who lived in Houston, and I was able to get tickets for them, and we all went, you know, to the after show parties and all this kind of stuff. And then we had a few too many beers, and we were getting on great with the road crew, and they were all piling all the equipment into trucks to go to Mexico for their next show, which was in Mexico City 2 nights later or something like that. Somehow we got woken up at the border of Mexico. I don't know why we were on that bus. I can't honestly tell you why. You know, too many drinks is why.
Yeah.
But we didn't have passports, of course, with us because we were just out for the night in Houston. You know, weren't planning on leaving the country.
Yeah.
So you had 2 Irish guys, white Irish guys, at like 4 o'clock in the morning, thumbing a ride back from the Mexican border. And nobody seemingly noticed us on this bus, by the way. So that was one that was kind of funny. There was a second one, which is kind of tragic and funny. I was going to India, and being the son of a airline pilot, I knew all the tricks about, you know, transit lounges and stopovers and what have you. And I think we were transferring from New York via Copenhagen or something, and I slipped through a door I shouldn't have slipped through, and realized that I flew to India without a visa, and Indians do not take this at all well.
Right.
So they put 2 and 2 together and made 6, and decided I must be a drug dealer or some kind of international spy, because how on earth did I get on a plane without a visa? The answer to that is an old rule, which was transit lounges that they used to have back in the 90s. They don't anymore. But, you know, once you got off from America, you could stay in this area and then go straight to your gate without passing immigration. So they locked me in a cell for 2 days. And I was in a cell with two Afghani terrorists, with a hole in the ground for a toilet and water dripping from a tap, which if I had drunk, I would have almost certainly been pretty ill. The kind of irony or funny part of it is the Irish embassy finally got me out 48 hours later, unfed and watered. And I then spent 2 weeks in having a really wonderful, wonderful trip in India. It was a business trip,
Yeah.
but I got to visit the Taj Mahal and Agra Fort and all those amazing things, and really just absorb New Delhi. And I've had a long-standing sort of affection for India ever since.
Yeah.
On the back of my book cover, you'll read that I was fired by Oracle because I was standing up for Indian rights. They were getting paid a lot less if they had different colored skin to me, and I, of course, wouldn't agree with that, and they fired me.
Wow.
But they did eventually stop that practice after the ACLU and a bunch of other people, called them on it. It wasn't just Oracle, by the way. It was a lot of big American corporations at that time were taking Indian, programmers over and paying them half of what they were paying Caucasians. Was quite common practice. Hopefully not so much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So let me ask you this. Of everything that you've done and accomplished and more importantly evolved to, what are you the proudest of?
I don't really think about that too much. Proudest, I'm not sure. Proudest might be some of the students I've had who've gone on to really excel and become CEOs themselves and things like that. Honestly, when I think of pride, I think of some of the shows that I played with the band. Where on that night everybody was just on and the audience were just absolutely into it, and everything just clicked so perfectly. I mean, that's not the happiest, I think is a better word for that than proudest.
Sure.
Had a band back in Dublin called Sexual Chocolate, which was from the Eddie Murphy movie. We borrowed the name.
Yeah.
And it was just a company band, and yet some of the shows we played were really, really went down amazingly well, and we had some bigger stars would jump up with our crappy little band to play songs with us, because we were kind of known as this. It was like a parody band, we made fun of certain songs and changed genres. We played like heavy metal Radiohead songs and country and Western Anthrax songs, so just tried to screw it around a little bit.
Yeah.
But that from a point of view, I'm sure you know it yourself, you're a music fan, and a great moment in a concert or a great concert can really stick in your mind for a long time. It just stays with you. And some of the great concerts I've seen, I remember seeing the Beastie Boys in this tiny venue in Dublin in like maybe mid-90s.
Wow.
And rather than their usual show, they played an all-instrument show, bass guitar and drums, for the whole night. And I was just blown. My mind to this day was blown at their instrumental skills. They're known more as rappers, and as kind of hip-hop artists. But boy, those guys could play. And they just jammed basically for 90 minutes. It was insane.
That's wild. They are amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that you've worked with, everyone you train, everyone that gets your book, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Not something I give a lot of thought to, honestly. Regular guy, really, just a transplant, On my road where I live, I'm kind of unique because there are no other immigrants on this road, and it's a pretty quiet area anyway. So, they think of me as, very different because, they're all American and they're all from California and what have you. But in general, not something I give a lot of thought to, honestly.
I dig it. So, Ian, if you want to show your book again, if anybody wants to get a copy, anybody wants to reach out, any of the other good work, good business in your world, where do they go?
IanSpandow.com is my professional site. Spandow House Dog Rescue is our nonprofit site. And of course, we're on, TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and all those good social medias. So you can see a lot of the stories and the dogs that we've rescued. Just go to social media and stick in Spandow or Spandow House.
Okay, I will. Ian, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Take care, Joe.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.